All right, everyone, no surprise here. Phil Scott is mounting his re-election bid for his fifth term as governor of Vermont. This is our favorite governor. I've spoken glowingly of him before, and sarcasm, of course. He's a RINO. In order to be a Republican in the state of Vermont and get elected, unless you're like the representative from the Northeast Kingdom, a handful of people from the Rutland area, and that's basically it, generally you have to be a RINO. You can win. There's nothing wrong with that, and get in good with the neighbors and stuff. But basically, you're going to be Democrat light, and Phil Scott is exactly the same way. I will be writing in Fred Tuttle, actually, for governor of the state of Vermont. Fred Tuttle, famous Vermonter from Tunbridge, actually. There's a movie called Man with a Plan. I think it's actually available on YouTube. Cult classic here in New England. He was an old farmer dude, and he cock-blocked a RINO Republican, actually, and then endorsed Leahy at the 11th hour. He ran in the primaries because he thought that the Republican candidate didn't know how many tits there were on a Holstein. That's his words, not mine. And they made a mockumentary sort of about it. It was a comedy mainly. It was a funny movie, and I've watched it many times. And he was just sort of an old farmer dude and became a movie star, a smash hit here in Vermont. I remember the VHS tape back when those were a thing. It was all over the place, like at Gillingham's and stuff. It was available everywhere, and everyone loved it. And saw him once, actually, towards the end of his life, when we were going to the store. I was with my mom, and Fred Tuttle was coming out of the store and shook hands and said, "Hi, I'll be writing him in." Because even his skeleton would be a better governor than Phil Scott. Let me tell you about Phil Scott. The one and only thing that he has done for the state of Vermont is slow walk the increase in taxation in our state. Like when they readjust the property taxes, as they're planning to do, if he can't stop them, and he can't because the Dems have a supermajority in the House and Senate, so it sucks to be you, Phil, a lot of Vermonters are going to get priced out of this state. I would expect there to be some more vacant properties, and then non-Vermonters from, foreign states will come in and fill the gap. Rich people mainly. And this will cause more of a death spiral in the state, driving up property prices even more, gentrifying it, which is hilarious, as rich people buy the derelict farm buildings, and, the Fucci Company and groups like that will buy up properties and rent them out, so we'll become a rent-only society. Basically, unless you're making six figures, at this point, Vermont's probably not the state for you. It's like, in the past, I've said that people should consider moving to the state of Vermont. I no longer tell them that. I say, you're better off with New Hampshire, really. You're better off, you'd pay lower taxes in Maine, ironically enough. Pretty much anywhere. Hell, you'd be better off in the upstate New York region than in Vermont at this point. We don't have any infrastructure. The farms that draw the tourists are drying up. Like the dairy down the road, they went out. They had really great milk, too. It was made literally right down the road. I could pretty much walk to that dairy, to Thomas's Dairy. So I could see the cows. I could vouch for the product being safe, being good, high quality. It's no longer there. It doesn't exist anymore. Phil Scott's one of his first main actions. He ran originally in his first term against a woman named Sue Minter. Now, Sue Minter was backed by Bloomberg, Michael Bloomberg from New York City, and piled money into her campaign. And one of her big things was, we're going to eliminate guns, basically, in the state of Vermont. Now, we have a very low gun crime rate. We don't have a lot of, or at least we didn't have a lot of violent crime in general at the time. And then, school shooting happens half the country away. Phil Scott, who had run against Sue Minter on that token and said, well, I'm not really in favor of this gun control stuff, he basically passed exactly what she had proposed, minus a ban on assault-style weapons. That was the only part that was parsed out. So in the state of Vermont, unless it's a grandfathered mag, you can't get a standard capacity magazine. They're illegal. If it's grandfathered in, then you can have it. And you can, I believe, trade them as well. I have had people offer grandfathered magazines to me. I've rejected that because I don't want any problems, and it's kind of a gray area. But anyway, there are available. It's just you pay through the nose probably for them. But he greenlighted 90% of the same bill that he had run against explicitly when he was running for governor. He opposed that. Then he supported it all of a sudden the second that something happens in an entirely different state that has never happened here. He's a cuck. He's a cuck-servative. So I'm not going to vote for him. I don't care how scary the Democrat candidate for governor is. They're not going to win anyway. Vermont has a long tradition of re-electing incumbents unless they really screw up. For instance, Shumlin, the person that Phil Scott replaced. He wasted so much money trying to field universal health care in the state of Vermont. He had millions of dollars for a focus group, a study. It was led by Jonathan Gruber, the architect of Obamacare. He promptly got canned by the state and sued for hundreds of thousands of dollars for embezzling taxpayer money. Not sure if we ever recouped that loss, by the way. Shumlin, therefore, said it wasn't workable in the end, and it wasn't. The progressives are the ones that kicked him out. They wanted somebody even further left. In the end, we got Phil Scott. But I mean, on everything except for fast-marching taxation in the state and driving even more people out and making it unaffordable for the average Vermonter, on everything else, on every other count, he's failed completely. He's a do-nothing governor anyway. He sits on his hands and does nothing, partially not out of his own fault, but because he can't do anything. He has to deal with a supermajority of Democrats in the House and Senate. So on anything that they want to hold rank on, they can just override his veto anyway. Instead, he somewhat wisely chooses to attempt to negotiate, to talk them down out of the worst excesses of their high tax and anti-gun policies. That's basically all he does. He's a placeholder governor. I don't see Vermont, by the way, changing drastically anytime soon. If anything, we're quickly becoming the San Francisco of the Eastern Seaboard, which is sad because that's not the Vermont that we should be. It's not the Vermont at its best that people expect. Tourists come and they admire, Church Street, and then they go and they see the leaves and go skiing, and then they leave, basically. That's what our state is good for. We give our kids a world-class and extremely expensive education at great taxpayer expense, and more than half of them leave the state to go get jobs. They go work on oil rigs in Texas or the Dakotas, or they go into tech, they move to California. California, in some places, has a better quality of living for people who got a Vermont-class education than Vermont does. Nobody remains in the state. I'm in a unique position because I'm self-employed, so I'm at leisure to do that. But honestly, if I was working a regular job, living a regular life, I wouldn't choose to live in this state. If I wanted to stay in New England, I'd move to New Hampshire. Sure, the property prices are onerous there as well, but Vermont is very quickly becoming unaffordable for the average person. We're talking about a double-digit increase in the property tax rate across the board, even for people who pay the lowest bracket because they're poor. The one saving grace is that it's a bracketed instead of absolute number system, as it is in some states. You have a flat system, like 5% or whatever it happens to be. Shouldn't even have property taxes. They're unconstitutional. Where in the Constitution does it give the right to the government to make you pay rent on land that you own free and clear, by the way? I never understood it. There are a handful of states that are wise enough not to have property taxes and thought about moving to one of them at some point. Vermont is a mess right now. It really is a mess compared to what it was when I was a kid. I don't mean to be nostalgic, but objectively speaking, there are fewer good-paying jobs. There's a declining population, especially in places like Rutland, Barre, etc., blighted areas of the state. No offense to my fellow Rutland residents, but we call it Vegas for a reason now, don't we? Rutland, where the party never stopped because it never began. That used to be the old adage. It's a stop-by for tourists. They gas up their car and then they go up to Killington. It's basically what it is. Our state is in decline. Doesn't need to be. It's not like we don't have clean water and lots of trees, the ability to farm. It's not like we couldn't reduce zoning regulation. It's not like we couldn't push back against the rise of the plutocratic rental class in this state and try to make things affordable for the average person. We had that system before. It was actually working. But then the left wing came in and progressivized the state and made it unaffordable for the average person, at first becoming unaffordable for the working class, then seeping up to the lower middle class, especially with the Great Recession crushing the housing market. Now we're inching our way through this core middle class, making it unaffordable for them. Person makes $70K a year. Have you checked the rental prices in the state of Vermont? Have you checked them? You're making $70K a year. That's not bad, by the way. You're making a decent income. You ain't affording a decent rental, not if you need more than one bedroom. If you're single and you're entrepreneurial, especially self-employed, you don't have a lot of overhead expenses, etc., maybe you're not in debt or anything, you're kind of making it, moving to Vermont would make sense. Yeah, you'll be able to rent a place, a studio or whatever. You can probably swing it. But if you got a family, yeah, that's going to go over well. I don't think so. Maybe you can afford a one-bedroom apartment in a place like Barre. That's about all. Again, the rental availability. We've got a housing crisis in the state of Vermont too, and it's not because people aren't leaving the state in droves. It's because all the properties keep being bought up and turned into rentals. Not that anyone who's not a company would want to rent out in the state of Vermont anyway due to our onerous rental protection laws. So Phil Scott is a RINO. I guarantee I won't vote for him. I will be voting for Fred Tuttle, actually. He's dead, but he'd still do a better job. That's about all. Peace out.